back with another Insight conversation as part of the ATL Education Expo. I'm here with Tyler Gwynn, the Assistant Superintendent, right? Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources for Marietta City Schools. Apologies for not getting that right the first time. I meant to ask before we started recording about that. So Tyler, you sit in a really interesting seat. We're going to dive into all of your different experiences along the way. But first off, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, Ian, I'm glad to be here, and thanks for the invite. And always excited to talk education, to talk recruitment, how technology can serve teachers and students better. And to any and all K-12 teachers that are listening out there, thank you for doing what you're doing. Our kids need us now more than they ever have before. So, and I think Ian and his company are hopefully going to provide opportunities to have even more impact than we did before. So that's exciting.
I appreciate that. So why don't we start by just getting a little background, Tyler. So how did you get in education in the first place? And what was that early journey like when you started your career?
Yeah, so going back, I went to school and I had a sales job waiting for me right out of college. So I was so excited to get out of college and go get my big time sales job and, have my 6-figure salary waiting on me. I mean, it was so exciting. And then I think the good Lord had a different path waiting for me, because as much as I tried, it was not going to happen. And it just, people started calling me and, hey, do you still want to teach? Do you still want to coach? Because it had always been kind of there,
Sure.
And my wrestling coach in high school was like a second father to me, still is today. I still just want to be like him. And so, he called me, and next thing you know, I'm subbing and, really falling in love with the classroom setting and the daily impact that I can have on people. And I quickly realized that education is sales. You are selling an unwanted product most of the time to a client that doesn't know that they need it. And you've got to close the deal and make that real for them and build that relationship, which is all sales is. And then, basically selling why this can help you and build you for the future. So it just clicked, man. It was just DNA for me. I mean, it was, so I just immediately jumped in, feet first, and, and just the career took off, and coaching and teaching. And I was in a Title I school, and, but it was my old school. And so, I just dug my heels in, and, it was just a powerful experience. And I mean, to this day, if I needed 50 guys and girls, whatever, to help me with if my house burned to the ground tonight, I would have hundreds of places to go to take care of me and my family because of the relationships that I built with kids and families back then. So, so that was my early on career, and coaching wrestling and baseball and golf, and then eventually softball, and then eventually speech and debate. And then I transferred schools after 8 years, and to a very different type of school in terms of socioeconomics, kind of the exact opposite. So I got to see that world, which is just as challenging, just different in a lot of ways. And I started getting my advanced degrees. I started going back to school and getting serious about number one, my paycheck, and then number two, my future. And those advanced degrees changed everything. It changed my classroom. It changed my perspective. It changed on what I thought I could, it kind of brought me out of my four walls of my classroom. And I started to understand that there's a whole lot more going on out there than this stupid standard that I'm trying to get my kids to learn that day, or making sure they answered these 3 questions on the next unit test or whatever. There's so much more. And so I just dove into that. And I think that led to some opportunities, and I was fortunate enough to be recognized and honored in a lot of incredible ways that still just humble me and blow me away. And so I think those ultimately led to eventually a recruiting opportunity. Gotcha. So
Well, before we get into the recruiting,
Basically,
I want to probe a little bit of your backstory there, because there's two things that came up that I find really interesting. The first is how much coaching you did. Were you teaching at the high school level, middle school? What was the level?
high school.
Yeah. And so I was a coach too in high school, or not in high school, but as a teacher at a high school. And I'm curious, a lot of people, especially folks who are not teachers, think about, well, if you're a teacher, you're already underwater all the time. Why would you go on and take on a coaching role? What role did coaching play, in terms of a balancing act for you with teaching? Do you feel like it really, it was a huge add to the experience, or did it end up being more work than it was worth?
No, never more than it was worth. It was worth every ounce of time, and you don't get paid for it. One time when I was an assistant coach, my head coach actually calculated our hours that we had put into the season.
Yeah.
And he figured it up that he made 8 cents an hour that year, and I made 4 cents an hour.
Wow.
So it was
never at the minimum wage. That's great.
Yeah, right. But it was never about that. It was, I think coaching and teaching go hand in hand. I mean, the successes and the stories and the lessons that I had to bring from the wrestling mat and the baseball field, I could bring that directly into the classroom and relate and connect to a lot of kids in different ways. Many, not all, but many of the greatest teachers that I worked with in a 15-year teaching career were also coaches, and just as good coaches as they were. I will say this, it's hard to be great at both. And I remember a time when my wrestling program was top 5 in the state, and we were competing at every level. We were competing nationally, and we were growing very, very quickly. And I started to realize that one was starting to pull from the other.
Yeah.
And I was having trouble as a pretty young teacher, year 6, year 7. I was having trouble maintaining excellence, because I was not going to do anything other than that. Like my day in and day out had to be top notch. My kids were worth that. And so I remember having a conversation with my athletic director asking if I could have another planning period, because I felt like the one was pulling from the other, and I wanted to maintain excellence in both. He quickly shut that down and said, absolutely not. So, you just do what you have to do. You just suck it up, and it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of hours.
Yeah. I when I started teaching, I made the glorious mistake of emailing our athletic director and saying, hey, I've got background in soccer and basketball. I'd love to help coach or something like that. If there's ways to step in. And immediately, I had never even met the guy, and he emails me back. He's like, let's talk soccer. And I walk into his room, first time meeting. He's like, you, Mr. Cohen? I was like, yep. He's like, you're going to start the soccer teams. And I was like, oh, okay. And fast forward, I was like, do we have jerseys? Do we have equipment? Like, where are we starting from? He's like, we don't have any of that, but I'll talk to the booster club. We'll see if we can get you some funding. And he came back 2 days later, and I was like, yeah, so boosters, like, what do you think? He's like, we can give you $50 to start your teams. I was like, $50, keep the money. Like, that's not going to do anything. But it was a slog though. I mean, we fundraised and all this stuff, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I completely agree with everything you described, right? Like, at first, time-wise, it's certainly a lot. I'd stay after school until like 6 or 7 p.m. When you're away games, you don't get back till 9, 10 at night sometimes. But at the same time, like, the depth of relationships that you can build by being a coach, and then how that reverberates back when you go back to the classroom, and you get a lot of allies too amongst the students who don't want to mess up anymore because you can make them run or something like that. So it's such a fruitful experience, and it's counterintuitive, right? Like, most people think teachers don't have any time as it is. Why would you want to add something else? In reality, it's there's something about that, I think, that's just actually deepening the experience, right?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, 100%.
The other thing you mentioned was getting advanced degrees that changed everything. And you specifically just said about how your comparison was to, like, looking at a standard. Obviously, like, we're all teaching from standards most of the time. And, as a world geography teacher, the standards I could argue those are the worst standards in the standards book for any subject.
Agreed.
But how did your advanced degrees really change things? I feel like people don't hear that a lot. I mean, most of the time it's like, oh, you get advanced degrees to go in leadership, but it's a lot of like traditional academic stuff. But what about that experience for you really helped you kind of break out of the, that rote standard based kind of thinking?
Well, I think that maybe not all, but I think a lot of young teachers just teach the way that they learn. And they think about their favorite teachers and they try to model. I mean, we're kind of do the same thing with our parents. We are what we were modeled for the most part at first. And then we start to become our own adult and unique individual. And so that was kind of, my path. And so I was like, this is the way I learn. So this is the way I'm going to teach. And, this 10% of the classroom, they don't get it. That's their problem. What's wrong with them? There's nothing wrong with me. I'm doing it right. There's something wrong with them. And so I think just kind of getting out of that mold and seeing these other ways, these other perspectives, these other ideas that just, and I mean, again, not all of them. A lot of your classes are a waste of time. I mean, just in all honesty, and it's all, a lot of it's theory based. I'm like practical. That's what I want. What I can use tomorrow is what I'm looking for.
You're talking about the advanced degree classes?
Yes.
Okay. I thought you were talking about like the high school subjects, which I was like, oh, okay.
Oh, well,
maybe so.
It may be so as well, but yes, I was referring to the advanced degree classes. The theory based stuff I was never really interested in. I wanted something I could plug into my classroom that week, and make it better. And so I found some things and I found some different ideas and just bottom line, just a whole new perspective of I needed to get that 10% of kids that were not getting me. And I was going to chase them down. I was going to reach every single one of them, build a relationship.
Yeah, definitely. And that's where I think the sales comparison definitely converges, right? Like a lot of times when you're selling, you're told, don't waste too much time on people who are really not interested, right? You want to focus on but
that's right.
Education, like that is the dedication you need to be able to, because you're equally responsible for and care about every single student in the classroom. So it's a whole nother learning curve. So then you mentioned you made a transition into recruitment. So what was that transition like? Was it straight from the classroom into like an HR role or something? And then why did you make that jump?
Yes, it was straight from the classroom directly into HR and recruitment. And it was perfect. The guy who kind of thought about it and orchestrated it, again, humbly just nailed it because I was just out of the classroom. I could talk to young teachers, the talk of language. When you are a recruiter and you go in the recruiting field, you see a lot of, central office people, people that haven't been in the class in a long, long time.
Right.
And they have very different conversations than teachers. Yeah. And so I was able to have this teacher to teacher conversation. Plus I was on fire about what I was doing in the classroom and what I had just done and how I was changing education. And you couldn't shut me up. And so they were like, you can just go to 10 or 15 places a year. I went to 35. I wanted to go far and wide. I blew recruitment out of the water because I wanted to make a name for my district and I wanted to bring in the very best east of Mississippi. I actually went to Texas once too, but ultimately it was just absolutely perfect. Plus my sales like personality, being in four walls for 15 years. I loved it. I loved my kids. I still miss them, but being trapped in a room for me is really, really hard. Yeah. So it was like a bird out of a cage, kind of. And so I was responsible for hiring, 1,000, 1,200 teachers a year. And I was going to go get every single one of them and nobody was going to stop me, so it was perfect situation.
You make it sound like it was sort of happenstance that somebody noticed that you could thrive in that role, or were you actively seeking out other roles besides teaching?
I was not actively seeking out at all. As I mentioned, I had done some pretty big things that I think brought a lot of attention from the district. I happened to win the district teacher of the year that year. And so I was giving speeches at different locations, and ultimately I would find out later that the superintendent and the deputy superintendent, hearing those and meeting, we met, had conversations. They started to think about bringing back the recruiter role that had not been in that district for more than 10 years.
Wow.
And so they started talking about like, okay, this might be a perfect fit. This guy is like crazy for education right now.
Yeah.
He's coming off this year of all this big stuff. This might be a perfect selling point. And it just worked out beautifully.
Gotcha. So now you've been on the HR side of things for a little while. I'm curious. We'll talk in a second about teacher recruitment and how it's changed over time. I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts on that. But I'm also curious about, now that you're on sort of the central office side of things, how's your teacher lens itself to your experiences working in the back office, day-to-day kind of stuff? And because you even mentioned it too, with like central office folks going out and doing recruiting, sometimes they're just not relatable anymore to the teachers. But and I feel like as a former teacher, we always think of the central office as this like big bad bureaucracy that's going to slow everything down. So given your personality and your strong opinions, like how did you adapt to that, being on the other side of that coin?
Well, I kind of come into this. I went into recruiting, and I was also responsible for retention. Mm-hmm. And so
one person, for recruitment and retention.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. For the third largest school district in the state of Georgia.
Yikes.
But listen, I was fired up. I was like, you're going to pay me to go find the very best and bring them into this district. And you're going to pay me to go, do great things for teachers and show them appreciation and honor them so that they'll stay. Yes, I'll do it. Of course.
You put it that way. Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah. So that's the way I saw it, and still do. I see my role now as just nothing but an opportunity to support teachers and ultimately have classroom impact. I want to go out there and find and hire the very best and bring them here. And I want to build this district up to the point where it's worth the trip. It's worth the brand. It's worth the tens of thousands that we spend on recruiting. It's worth that interview that the person's going to give us an opportunity for. But that's the way I saw it. It's just service. And, it's worked out. I also, I always felt like the central office was just so far removed from the classroom. So right. I wanted to bridge that gap. So I built retention programs where I invited the central office to come with me every Friday to a different school, and we would honor a teacher. We didn't give the award. We chose a student and let that student honor one of their teachers that had made the biggest impact in their life. And then I had community members come in and just shower the entire school with gifts. And that winning teacher literally walked out with a bag worth over $3,000 worth of goodies, discounts, coupons, handouts, whatever.
Academy Award bags that you get from going to like the Oscars.
And that's it. That's exactly right. That's exactly what I wanted it to be. So, even to this day, like, tomorrow's Thursday, it's our last day of school. So I will either go to whichever one of my secretary, I don't know where I'm going tomorrow, but I'm going to a school tomorrow. Sawyer Road Elementary School. I'm going to help with their carpool line. Like, I want to be in the schools. I want to have the conversations with teachers, because if you don't, you become a central office, far removed employee that no longer understands really what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I'm curious, in the midst of the pandemic, and obviously teaching as a profession has taken a lot of hits over the last couple decades, and interest isn't nearly where it used to be in the profession overall. How has the recruitment scene changed from your seat? Since you started to now, like, how is it different? And are you finding it really difficult to kind of cultivate more prospects for recruitment?
Yeah, well, so I'll kind of talk on two fronts here, like pre-COVID and then COVID recruitment. So pre-COVID, first of all, I'll say it is incredibly competitive. It's just supply and demand, right? So as the supply dwindles, the demand grows. And so, I mean, everywhere I went that first year, I mean, the place is packed. I mean, school districts from all over the nation,
Right.
especially to HBCUs and some of our big colleges that has the most diversity. There are companies, not education companies. There are companies, not just schools, California, from New York, from Seattle, that are down here in Georgia picking off our best and brightest.
Right.
And here I am offering a $40,000 teaching salary job, and here's some small company in California, they're starting it at 70 or 80.
Right.
And so it's just non-competitive. So it is incredibly competitive. I'll definitely say that. And then I noticed a drastic drop from year one to year two. Year one, I would say there were more candidates in the room than recruiters. Year two, that it was about the same number. And by year three of recruiting, it had flipped. Everywhere I went, there were more recruiters in the room than there were candidates. And we've continued to see that trend. And listen, I was in the classroom during the economic downturn, and I was department chair at the time, and I used to jump all over my teachers because I would literally hear them tell the students, like, don't go into education. You need to do this, you need to go into that, you need to go into this. I'd look at them and say, who's going to teach your kids? Who's going to teach your grandkids? You're steering the best and brightest away from one of the most rewarding careers you could possibly have.
Right.
And so, but I think that message was sent out loud and clear, and colleges and universities are still feeling the impact of that. Now, so that's pre-COVID. COVID recruiting is totally weird, totally different. And I mean, my recruiter is telling me stories that literally, thank you. My recruiter is telling me stories that, she is, she's part of a recruiting event, and she's literally just staring at a blank screen.
Right.
And she just waits for people to check in. It's not like, I mean, man, give me a room and give me a couple of rock star teachers, and we'll start grabbing people that walk by, even the people that won't look at us.
Right.
We'll start having conversations, and next thing you know, I've got their information, and I'm following up with them, and the next thing you know, they apply.
Yeah.
And sometimes we hire them, so it's very different, but the numbers are down, and it's harder to get in touch with people and kind of sell your brand and market what we're doing here. So therefore, you have to be crazy creative and just do it in a different way. And so that's where companies like yours help educators think about doing things in a different way. And so that's when, literally we came up this year, we're not going to have a face-to-face job fair. So how can we provide a virtual opportunity that's not just some massive collection of people talking over each other, that doesn't have the personal time, or not such a giant time suck, if you will. If you're the Principal Cohen, and you're going to meet with 10 people at 5 minutes apiece or 10 minutes apiece, that's a long job fair right then and there. So we came up with this virtual showcase idea and found found some software to support it. It's still not what I want it to be. Like, my vision is so much better than what we currently have. And so anyway, it's exciting though, right? I mean, it's a new way to recruit. It's a new way to get the brand out there. But it's very, very different. And ultimately the competition is raising, the numbers are dropping, and we've got to continue as a school district to figure out better and better ways to separate ourselves.
Right.
And to communicate that message effectively to candidates.
Right. I mean, it definitely sounds like, you're dealing with what, the hand you're dealt, but I'm curious, when you think about the broader spectrum and like just this decreasing interest in teaching that you alluded to, what do you think drives that? And, obviously, and we know that salaries are one thing. And if you think that's the biggest thing, definitely tell me. But I'm curious, like, because this is going to be a problem that we all are going to feel really hard in, the next couple of years, probably, this shortage that seems to be growing. So how do you think about that? And what do you think is driving that?
So, yeah, money is a factor, but it is not the factor. People leave bad bosses. That's why people leave. Teachers don't stay in the industry because they're not supported enough and they're not prepared enough because we want to do too much hand holding in student teaching. And we want them to observe, all this time observing instead of just throwing them in there and letting them kind of figure things out. And then, kind of be in the background in a supportive role. But I mean, yeah, at the end of the day, I think people grow up and think they have this idea of teachers, and a lot of them still think, oh, I'll get my summers off. And I mean, if you want to be an awesome teacher, you don't take much time off in the summer.
Right.
And you'll rest and relax and refresh, but you're probably going to be working on something to improve something the next year.
Yeah.
The best do anyway. And if you're a coach, your year never stops. If you're going to be one of the best programs, you don't have a season. Right. Your season is the whole year. And so I think people realize it is a whole lot harder than they realize. And, kids are changing. Kids are different now. Of course, our parents said the same things about us and their parents said the same things about them, but there's always a generational struggle. Right. And this infatuation and addiction to technology and phones, et cetera, this distraction is very difficult to combat, be it by policy or just classroom procedure, right? Right. Or really just, competitively for engagement, so it's hard. And so I think a lot of recruiters, again, they just want to close the deal. Ian Cohen, special ed certified. Oh, okay, let's hire him. Right. Instead of having a difficult conversation of what's your background, Ian? We have an opening in this school. This school is not easy to teach at. Right. It's a Title I school or it's a high socioeconomic school. We need to have those really difficult conversations of how you're going to deal with those difficult situations. Otherwise, I'm going to be replacing you the next year anyway. Right. So I think a lot of times it's just, kind of a check the box. Okay, I filled in this gap and we move on. Versus real retention is hiring the right person and kind of cultivating that relationship of support and then monitoring them throughout the year. Those people are more likely to stay. I don't think it's about the money. I mean, we all basically pay about the same. You've got your outliers here and there, but even the outlier is, $4,000 or $5,000 away from where I am. I mean, that's, geography is a huge one, even if I pay you more, that hour drive in traffic, that's going to wear you out. I'll be replacing you next year anyway. Right. So I just think it's all of those things. And I'm sorry not to really organize and categorize all those things. It's a complex problem,
but I do think you've hit on a couple of parts that people don't even think about. I mean, clearly the people are understanding the job is really a lot more challenging than it looks, right? And then, geographic constraints are something a lot of jobs don't have necessarily, especially in today's world, but you can't teach from home. Obviously during the pandemic you can, but normally you can't. So I remember I have to commute 90 minutes each day to get to and from the school I was working at. And that does wear on you, especially if you want to do something long-term with that school. You'd most likely want to move into that community and be a part of it, but that's not really something that we do a ton of anymore as a culture and society. And then on top of all of that, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, every generation of students is going to bring with it a different set of interests, mannerisms, tendencies. And we're in the midst of a really crazy one right now with social media and technology. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just, I guess this is a perfect sort of backdrop for the last question, which is, as we think ahead to where do we want the system to go, be it structurally, content, instruction, whatever it is, when you think about the year 2050, so roughly 30 years from now, what do you think the education should look like, or what do you hope it looks like by that point in time?
Well, let me say this, Ian. I hope that I am looking at it from my condo on the beach, either in Hawaii or Florida. Let me just say that right now. I'll be enjoying retirement and trusting people like you, Ian, to figure things out at that time. God, I cannot wait. It's going to be awesome. But I would say it's going to have to be. I think education in 2050 is just going to be all about choice, options, differentiated, meeting parents right where they are. You're already seeing trends moving toward that. Of course, COVID has forced us more into that virtual realm that I've been hearing for 10 years that, we're going all virtual. Everything's going virtual. We will never, ever get away from face-to-face, that powerful relational impact of a teacher face-to-face with your kid every single day. The economic impact of that, of losing that, I don't see that. I don't see that changing. Nor do I see parents ever wanting to be with their kids every single day while managing their work from home as well. So I don't think you're ever going to see that go away, but I think you're just going to see more and more differentiated options based on the early skill sets and accomplishments and talents that we're going to see in our kids, especially as they demonstrate at young age, at younger and younger ages. And so, I mean, think of advanced classes. Like in high school, it's AP. In middle school, I think it's AC in some places, and then elementary school, it's Target or whatever.
Sure.
So those kids are going to be given different options, and I think a lot of those options are going to be led by technology like you're going to be offering, them working with somebody across the world based on their skill set and their early talents that they've shown. So I just think that it's just going to be all about options. I think it's going to be blended models. I think some kids are going to come in a couple of days a week. Some kids may again, based on talent, they may work in more of a job-related field during the day and take their core classes at night or online in the evenings or whatever. I just think it's just going to be all over the place. The cookie cutter, block wall school building that the bell rings here and everybody goes home at 3:30. Like, I think you're going to see that start to drastically change. I think the building's never going to be closed. I think it's going to be open all the time. I think the virtual education opportunities are going to be open all the time. So, and you're going to be a part of that. You get to be a part of that. You get to lead that movement. Yeah. And that's fantastic. That's awesome. It's exciting.
Yeah, no, I hear you. I mean, one of the themes coming out of these conversations is that we're all sort of getting really tired of the rigid structures that are in place. And I think, to your point, we have not only a generation of folks who are like, yeah, we can see this doesn't work that well anymore. Like, we've known that the structure of education is outdated. And now I think maybe the tools are getting to a place where they're catching up enough that we might be able to really, melt down some of these walls and restructure some of these experiences. COVID certainly helped with that too. So yeah, I think options and choice definitely seems like a way we might be headed. So thank you so much, Tyler. We appreciate your candor and your experience. It's always interesting to talk to folks who've gone from the classroom to the central office, and especially in recruitment now, being where teachers are. So I appreciate the time, and we thank you for sharing your story with us.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. I appreciate your time. Best of luck to all you educators out there.